I worked for 15 years for a parking company while I worked my way through school to earn eventually a PhD. Most of the men I worked with were blacks from the South with less than a high school education. My nickname when I first started was Whitey. I was 16 when I started. You're supposed to be 18 to work there because it involved cars, which are mechanical. But my father knew somebody, so they gave me a job. Eventually, I landed a tenure track academic job that we all seek. I retired as a full professor, served as chair for 12 years as three different departments. To my shock, when I became an academic, I discovered that the uneducated black guys I had worked with as a kid and a young adult were far more honest, courageous, wise, and loyal than the academics, despite the latter's supposed better upbringing and education. I never knew what a pathological liar was until I became an academic. It does sound harsh. While I often had dirty hands and smelled of sweat when I worked in the parking garage, I never had the near constant sensation of being stabbed in the back. While working at the garage, on a few occasions, customers threatened my life. One night, my assistant manager was shot in the head. But when I was threatened, the men I worked with always were there with their blades, usually straight razors, drawn in support. Conversely, as an academic, I knew that if some loon threatened me in my department, the faculty would lock their doors and protect themselves. I saw it happen to a fellow chair.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you. Welcome to the Party Pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 325. I'm talking to Michael Anthony Palmer, who was originally from Philadelphia, and he was got a PhD at Temple, and he worked for the Naval Historical Center at the Pentagon, and was involved in the military, and also was at the history department at East Carolina University for several years. So how are you, Michael?
Good.
Yeah,
Enjoying
it's
the 4th of July.
yes, it's yeah, and you're still on the East Coast.
Yeah.
Michael, first of all, I do want to know. So you were at East Carolina, and you were also so you've had a very interesting career. But the one thing that I found interesting is you had this tweet, and I'd like for you to read it off because this is one reason I just found this tweet irresistible.
Oh, yeah. You want to just read the thing?
Read it off, please.
All right. I worked for 15 years for a parking company while I worked my way through school to earn eventually a PhD. Most of the men I worked with were blacks from the South with less than a high school education. My nickname when I first started was Whitey. I was 16 when I started. You're supposed to be 18 to work there because it involved cars, which are mechanical. But my father knew somebody, so they gave me a job. Eventually, I landed a tenure track academic job that we all seek. I retired as a full professor, served as chair for 12 years as three different departments. To my shock, when I became an academic, I discovered that the uneducated black guys I had worked with as a kid and a young adult were far more honest, courageous, wise, and loyal than the academics, despite the latter's supposed better upbringing and education. I never knew what a pathological liar was until I became an academic. It does sound harsh. While I often had dirty hands and smelled of sweat when I worked in the parking garage, I never had the near constant sensation of being stabbed in the back. While working at the garage, on a few occasions, customers threatened my life. One night, my assistant manager was shot in the head. But when I was threatened, the men I worked with always were there with their blades, usually straight razors, drawn in support. Conversely, as an academic, I knew that if some loon threatened me in my department, the faculty would lock their doors and protect themselves. I saw it happen to a fellow chair. And I was commenting on
Yeah.
Dr. Saad's, I said, academics are replete with cowardly liars, which is what he had mentioned about them being
Yes.
cowards.
Yeah, that you're replying to God Sod. Do you know God Sod by chance? Or?
No, just by reputation. I've never actually met
Yeah.
him.
Yeah, he's a very insightful. Not to mention, he just seems like he'd be a really nice guy.
Yeah.
Although he's from. I'm getting a stereotype. I have to say, almost everybody from Lebanon is really nice, but yeah, because he's originally from there. But yeah,
Yeah, I had actually, I I was engaged a couple years ago. It didn't work out, but I was asked to give a talk to some people at the Special Operations Command in Tampa, Florida, at MacDill Air Force Base, and a woman picked us up, whom I had met at a conference earlier, and she's from Lebanon. She's a very young, beautiful, tall woman. She picked up my fiancée and I, and she's driving us to MacDill from where we were. We were both in Tampa at the time. And my fiancée asked her where she was from because she did have an accent. She said Lebanon. And my fiancée said, "Why would you leave Lebanon? It's such a beautiful country." And she said, "Well, I'm Christian and I didn't want to get raped or have acid thrown in my face." And
Yeah.
my very progressive at the time fiancée didn't know what to say to that, but that was pretty much, I guess, her reason for leaving. But yeah, it's a beautiful country. It's shame what's
Yeah, yeah, it's a shame what's happening in a lot of parts of the world. I don't know I don't know why we can't all just live together, but that seems to be how it is.
what's interesting. One of the things I'm old enough. I started college in 1969, and they were all you already had the Arab-Israeli conflict, and my professors in those days were constantly telling us how the Jews and Arabs could live together, just as the Jews and the Muslims could live together, just as the Christians and Muslims lived happily together in Lebanon, which was sort of the poster child for what Israel could be. And of course, that's all I heard in my classes until the Lebanese Civil War broke out, and then kind of they dropped that narrative that Lebanon was the model for happiness, as they were both slaughtering each other up there, and of course the Christians were for the most part getting driven out, which is why God Saad is here and that other woman I referred to earlier is here. They fled, because of so yeah, nobody talks about Lebanon as the model for the solution to the Arab-Israeli conflict. But from when I started school in 1969 and until the Lebanese Civil War broke out, just about the time I graduated, that's all I heard about was, oh, Lebanon's the model. And of course, it turned out it wasn't.
Yeah, I had one guy on who said that the best model would be a Swiss Canton style system. Switzerland is very decentralized. I mean,
Mhm.
you just decentralize things to a certain extent. You went to college when exactly?
I started in 1969.
I always ask this question. What did you pay for it at the time?
Uh, Actually, when I finished my PhD, I had no loans and $1,100 in the bank. Uh,
Yeah,
but the reason that I did that was because I was killing myself. I worked, it's kinda it's a I was accepted at Temple. Well, I always made decisions about where I went to school based on money.
yeah,
I mean, I had the option to go to Penn State out at College Park or Temple, which was in Philadelphia. I lived in Philadelphia. I could commute, so
yeah,
I didn't need to, and my parents didn't have a lot of money. So I did that and I worked. I also got it was a senatorial scholarship. It came from a state Pennsylvania senator, and they gave out so many. If you went to a state school, you got half off. And tuition at Temple at that point was, I think it was 500 a semester, give or
yeah,
take $50.
and
So I was only had to pay like $500 a year to go to Temple. Unfortunately, when I turned 18, I was 17 when I started. When I turned 18, spring semester, I registered to vote.
wow,
And I registered as an independent. And my father, who had Philadelphia's a very corrupt city. My father was a policeman. He was corrupt. I don't like admitting it, but I mean, he was. I saw corruption. I worked there a long time, and I saw corruption all over that city. Uh, he had gotten me this scholarship. I wasn't even in the guy's district, but he got it because he knew this guy from one, I don't know, who knows. So he came home one day, he was furious. And he said, "You lost your scholarship." I said, "What did I do?" He said, "You registered as an independent. The guy's a Democrat. You gotta register as a Democrat." "Didn't I tell you that?" I said, "If you did, I don't remember." So the guy pulled my scholarship, which was for 4 years. So I lost my scholarship because I went and registered as an independent. And I can't complain too much because I never should have gotten it in the first place. I wasn't even in a man's district. But my father and I had a big fight, and I told him, "You never have to pay another nickel to get me through school," and he never did. So I worked at Nabisco at third shift as a factory, and
yeah.
eventually, in grad school, my health broke down. I almost lost my teeth, and I was a mess.
Wow.
But, I never I never ended up with loans, and I always had cash, and, when I got done, I had no loans, and 1,100 is not a lot today, but it was better than having, I mean, when I was chair, I surveyed our faculty one time, and I had a guy who had $160,000 in student loans,
Yeah,
and he was making, like, $40,000.
yeah, I always like to ask that because the cost of college of course, Philadelphia has a lot of colleges.
Oh,
So,
yeah,
I
we had
if you were looking at the other ones like Drexel or Penn or Villanova or
St. Joe's,
St. Joseph, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
I
you
had friends went to all of them, but
were you at Temple or, did you, because when I think of Temple, I always think of Bill Cosby, but
yeah, I mean, he was around. I never ran into him. Hall& and Oates were, like, getting started when I was there. I never met them in class or anything. We did different classes. I can't think of, one of a guy I was friends with for a long time until Trump got elected. He I won't mention his name. He was, Jay Leno's head writer,
oh, wow.
but and we had kept in touch. I even visited him in California once, but then when Trump got elected and he found out I voted for Trump, he defriended me on Facebook and never spoken to me since. Uh, but yeah, other people, I can't think of anybody else at Temple that you know,
Yeah.
celebrities or something who were floating around.
It's really a pretty small school from what I hear, though. It's not real, and because it is private, yeah.
No, no, it's a state school.
Yeah.
It
Oh,
was private and it's now part of the state system. So they it's in with Penn State and Pitt, you Temple, and then you have this sort of second tier, Westchester and Bloomsburg State, and the others, Indiana, and I forget some of the other
yeah.
ones. But
Yes.
it is actually a state school.
Yeah.
Uh, Although it began as the Temple was actually Baptist. I mean, but there were so many. There's a big Jewish community in Philadelphia, and I would say a disproportionate number of the Jews who graduated high school went to Temple. And a lot of people thought it was Temple because it was somehow connected, with Judaism or something, but it wasn't. It was the
Yeah.
Baptist Temple, and it was founded by a Civil War veteran who became a Baptist minister or something,
Oh,
and there's a whole thing about it.
yeah. I do want to clarify out there, Pennsylvania, there is a university called Indiana University, but it's in a
In Pennsylvania, yeah.
there's also a California University in Pennsylvania as well, which is in a town called California.
Yeah.
So,
As and there's Intercourse, Pennsylvania, which is, of course, one
yes,
of the most famous places, and,
and there's also Wyoming County in Pennsylvania as well, but so it's but I do, yeah, just clarify that, and so, yeah, Pennsylvania has a lot of colleges, and I know there's a weird way they're administered because I know Pitt is somehow a state school, but
yeah, well, it's like Temple. I mean, Penn State is pure state. Pitt, I think, originally was private and Temple was private, but somewhere along the line, they brought the 2 of them in, so now they're state schools, and then you have all the Penn and Duquesne and, there's loads of schools
oh, yeah,
in
there's a lot of
Pennsylvania.
small schools. I mean, I've got a distant cousin who's going to Seton Hill. It's
Mhm.
a lot Pennsylvania might have I'd be curious to look it up. Pennsylvania might have as more colleges than any state in the union. They've
Yeah,
got
I don't know, yeah.
tons of colleges. Only one really big one though, which of course is Penn State, which they also, if you look where it is, why'd they put it here? It said, well, it's about at the center of the state. If you go north, south, east, west, it's about. I mean, there's nothing else there, but it's a yeah. That's also a pretty campus if you've ever been there.
Yeah.
But yeah, so what are some other examples you noticed when you were in academia that were just egregious? I find it interesting that these people just didn't seem to. It's interesting these guys at the parking lot had your back, but your academics didn't. Do you have any other stories like that, or
Uh, a billion. I'm trying to think of some of the most
you had a
illustrative
case where
or
somebody on the faculty was threatened? What can you tell us more about that?
oh, that was down in a different department. I won't mention what department it was, but one of the faculty members flipped out on him and wanted to kill him, and
It
nobody
was
helped
from a
him.
faculty member, really? Wow.
Yeah, no, it wasn't like an irate student or something. This was a fellow. faculty member that they had hired. I mean, the chair, from my personal experience, was an asshole, and he probably deserved the guy's aggravation and sense of whatever. But still, I mean, nobody helped the guy out, and he was hiding in his office until the police came. Uh, but I mean, the academics are, it's like, from my ex or tweet, it's not that the guys I worked with when I was at the parking lot didn't lie. But I'll give you an example. Like, there was a guy who was an alcoholic, and we had a problem with him because you're operating cars. I mean, you can run into things or fly off a third floor roof, which I almost did once. I mean, not because I was drunk, but because brakes failed. But I mean, it was potentially dangerous. I mean, you could get hurt or hurt somebody. So we had this guy, and we were trying not to fire him. So we told him he wasn't allowed to go out to lunch because every time he'd go out to lunch, he'd get loaded. Liquid lunch. He'd hit the
Yeah.
bar and come back plastered and he's hobbling around. And then we'd have to send him home. If we send him home, we're shorthanded. If we don't send him home, he could hurt somebody or rack up a car. So we had him, and he still got drunk the one day. And eventually we were watching him, and the assistant manager figured out what he was doing. He had come in probably the day before and put a bottle in the tank of the toilet in the public restroom for the parking lot. So we found it, we pulled it out, and I put it in a drawer, and I called him over, and he was obviously drunk, and I don't remember what his name was. He ended up killing himself. He lit cigarette, passed out drunk, his house went up in flames, and he died. But we were trying to help him, but he was basically a nice
He's getting
guy,
bad stuff.
just had an alcohol problem. So he said, "No, he didn't drink, he didn't have." I said, "Look," I said, I know you got a stash here somewhere. Where?" And I knew where it was. I had the bottle in the drawer, and he denied it. So I opened the drawer, I pulled the bottle out. I got this bottle of, cheap whiskey, and the label's all wet because I said, "It was in the tank. We know you did it." And he said, "I'm sorry, I did it." And he admitted it. It's not that people didn't lie. I mean, they lied to me all the time. People lie. It's just the way life is. But, like, an academic equivalent of that, I was chair of a department, and we have a mail a copy room, supply room, and in the front of it, there's, all the mailboxes for the faculty. And you can get through with a key on the outside of the room and pull your mail out. Or you can come into the room and go around behind, and the backs are all open, and you can pull your mail out that way, which is what many faculty did. Uh, since I was chair, when my mail came in and it got sorted, they would put it right on my desk, so it didn't go into the box. So I'm in there one day, I'm looking for something in the supplies, and I'm crouched down behind a desk when I guess nobody saw me, and my predecessor, former chair, comes in. So I look up and I see him, and I'm about to say, like, "Hello," and he goes right to my mailbox, which I knew where it was, and he's in there trying to see if there's anything in my mailbox. Of course, there wasn't because the mail goes to my desk. But I knew the mailbox next to me belonged to a guy named Dave Long, who he didn't like. So I see him go in, and he picks out all the mail. This is a guy who's a full professor, former chair, self-professed Quaker, you know, uh, and he pulls the mail out of Dave Long's box. And he sorts through it, he puts it back, he takes one out, looks like sort of like a check-sized envelope, like maybe he thought there was a royalty check in there for a book or something. Anyway, so he plays around with it, he gets it open, and whatever was in there wasn't a check, it was some letter or something. He pulls it out, he reads it, folds it up, puts it back. I'm watching him the whole time, licks the thing, puts it back, and he's sliding it back into Dave Long's box. I stand up. So when he finishes, he turns around, he sees me standing there. And I said to him, I won't say his name, I might still be teaching, I don't wanna, get anybody sued. I said, Jack," it's not his real name, "Jack, that's a federal offense." I mean, he went through somebody's mail and opened it. And this guy, former chair of a department, self-professed, progressive, Quaker, he's all these nice things. And he looked at me and he said, "I didn't do that." And I said, "You know, I sat here, I've been standing here watching you. You went through my box, and then you went through Dave's box. You pulled it out, you opened it up, you put it back in." And he said, "I didn't do that." And I thought, you know, I and there were numerous times where I would catch people lying, and they would simply deny it. I mean, one time I I won't give the whole story. I had to move a guy's office. He didn't want to give up his office. He had to. I put somebody else in there. This is a guy with a PhD. He went in, he still had a key for the office. He went in and he urinated on the carpet in the guy's office, his colleague's office. I mean, these are PhDs doing this stuff. I mean, I never saw anything like that when I worked with, uh, people with 7th grade educations from the Georgia Sea Islands who spoke Goa. I mean, they would never do anything. I never saw them do anything approaching some of the stuff I saw, you know, academics do to each other. What they would do to students or, or others is just,
Yeah.
but, yeah, it's just like, at times I was like, if I could go over and do it again and go back to when I was in college, I would not have wasted the time and effort to go into academia. It's not that I didn't do well, I did. I ended up, I've checked off all the boxes that you should check off in a successful career, but I wouldn't do it again. It's very disheartening.
This is so wild. Just going into somebody's office and peeing on the floor. I mean, that's so. Sometimes I've heard of real old senile people doing stuff like that, but never somebody who's allegedly sane. Do you think? It almost seems like academia just attracts crazy people. Is that fair to say, or not? Because again, who walks into somebody's office and pees on the floor?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah, to be fair, I only know that one instance, but I used to have I called it, I shared 3 different departments. I had a department of 14, a department of 30, and a department of, I think it was 108. Uh, and I came up with what I called finding the ear. I said, I used to tell new chairs, because sometimes the dean would ask me to, talk to them. I'd say to them, "You're new. It's good. Within 6 months, you'll find the ear." And they would say, like, "What do you mean?" And there was a movie, what was it called? Uh, Blue Velvet. You remember? Have you ever seen Blue Velvet? The guy,
David Lynch movie.
right, right. Well,
I've seen it, but I don't have much memories of it. David
well,
Lynch, rather strange in my opinion.
yeah. Well, there's a scene in the movie where the guy, the main character, his father has had a stroke, and he goes to the hospital, he visits his father, and walking back, he cuts across a field to get back to wherever he was coming from. And as he's walking across the field, it's a beautiful field, it's a sunny day, birds and there's green grass. And then the camera starts zooming in on the grass, and then it zooms in a little more, and then in the grass, you see there are bugs and worms and things crawling around, and then it zooms in a little more, and it zooms in a little more, and eventually, there's a severed human ear, and he finds the human ear, and then the rest of the movie is, how did that ear, whose ear is it, and how did it get in the middle of the field, and why is it there? And that's the rest of the plot is. Yeah, I won't go through it. I don't remember all of it. I know it, to the extent I don't want to spoil it for anybody who hasn't seen it. I think it's a movie worth watching. But that's what I called finding the ear, because having been chair 3 different departments, it took me about 6 months, and in every department, I would find the ear. One day, it's like all of a sudden, it was like, "Holy effing shit," "I can't believe this is happening." This was something I would find in the files, or something I would learn, or something, and it was just, I like, "Oh my god," and it's not like I had come from a privileged life, and so I had never seen the realities of life. I mean, I worked in Center City. I was, 16 in Center City. We had homeless, we had hookers. I mean, there were prostitutes coming by for people. There was, criminality, I saw corruption, police corruption, city corruption, union corruption. The company I worked with, we ran Resorts International. I mean, there was mob involvement, I mean, the unions. I mean, I'd seen all this stuff. It's not like, you know, I'd seen more than they had seen, but I never expected to see what I found in academia. Unless you're actually a chair and you start getting into it and you have to deal with people, a lot of them don't know even what goes on in their own departments, but it's really, at best, disheartening, uh, enough to make me wish I had done something else in my life, but
And this was at East Carolina?
yeah. I mean, I taught for Georgetown, but that was, just part-time, and I did never got into, even when I was a faculty, I didn't realize what was going on until, uh, you become chair. And, I mean, there's stuff with Trump now, and they're going through, I mean, when I became chair of history, I had suspicions about some of the things that were going on. It took me close to a year to you know, get through the paperwork to prove some of the stuff that had happened. It just it takes a while because, I mean, you're trying to do things to clean things up, but then at the same time, you still have to run the day-to-day operations, so you don't have all the time in the world to, dig around. So sometimes it's, I'd be going through what's in here, and you'd open it up and you'd pull something out, and it's like, "Holy shit," you know? And they had stashed papers in there, or you'd ask for something and it had all been shredded. They destroyed all the records, which was violating a state law. You had to keep records, especially budget records, for 7 years. I had suspicions about some things that had been happening in the department. So when I get in there, I asked the administrative assistant, I asked, "Where are all the travel records?" And she said he kept them in his office. They should have been kept by her. That's her job. I said, "Where?" So she goes in, she opens a drawer, and it's an empty drawer. She said, "Oh my god, they're all gone." So we checked with some of the student assistants who'd been around, and they apparently had been shredded. So, okay, I figured probably what I was looking for was gone, but probably what I was looking for had been there. They were playing around with, uh, how they were allocating money and stuff like that. So, I mean, it was that deep with, I mean, there were my son, when he was in high school, uh, went to school with a girl his age, and this is, at this point, I was, like, 55, so he was probably in his 20s, so she was like him so he asked me, he said, "She's there," and turned out she was, like, had sex with any number of professors, including one guy who was, like, 40 years older than her at the time, and, he when I took over, I had to fill all these positions. He was chair of the personnel committee of the department, and he said, he said, "I'll sign off on everything. I don't even need to know. You do what you want. Hire anybody you want as long as this woman is in the list." So I said, "Yeah, sure." I knew her. I would have put her on the list anyway. And then so I asked one of the administrative assistants, why does she have to be on the list?" He said, "Oh, after so and so got done with her, he picked her up." And I thought, "Oh my god." And my son's calling me, asking me how she's doing, and I thought, and I knew her mother and father, and they didn't know, and I'm like, "Oh, how's our daughter doing?" I know she's peachy, you know? I don't know.
Uh, is that I suspect that's pretty common, right, or not?
Yeah, I mean, every department, there were
Yeah.
things like that. Some of them were, you abortions and marriage breakups and accusations. I mean, one of the toughest things I had to handle were, accusations about impropriety, and it turns out that sometimes people making the accusations were covering for them. It gets really involved. Uh, but
Well, yeah, well, obviously you have hopefully consenting adults here, but still you have a situation where there's somebody, might be using sex as a bargaining chip to get a better grade or pass the class or
Yeah, for the most part, it was just, consenting adults. I don't I mean, there's inevitably, if you have I mean, if somebody who's passing judgment on you and deciding whether or not you get a job, is does that influence your consent? It certainly doesn't look good. Whether it's criminal is another question, immoral, probably, uh, but it was just these were things I never thought I'd ever have to deal with. I didn't have to deal with it at the garage, with people with 8th, 7th grade educations. I mean, I didn't think I'd have to deal with it with, uh, people with PhDs, who were, it's not that they were worse maybe in many ways, but they were no better. And, you assume that, and I think one of the lessons there is, we assume that these people from these Ivy League schools and all, not only we think they know better than the unwashed, but that they are better. And the reality is they're not. I mean, they're just as bad. And in some ways, they're they're worse because they pretend to be so good. Whereas the dudes I work with at the parking lot, none of them ever pretended that they were, anything other than what they were. Uh, some of them had criminal backgrounds, some of them had fake names, and I knew it. And don't ever call me by my real name, in public. You had to use the other name in case somebody overheard. I mean, I went out once and there was like turmoil when I got back. The FBI had come and picked up one of the guys. He had it attempted armed robbery rap in Virginia, and he apparently had escaped, and he was working for us, and I come back, and, like, everything's a mess because the FBI had been there, and they hauled the guy away in, cuffs, chains, and but, these guys weren't telling me, they're God's gift to humanity,
yeah.
and that they know everything, and they have better judgment than everybody else. They had no pretense about them, and I think that's what was I found looking back at it, I said, I didn't realize how good I had it, working with them as opposed to, working with, and then I don't wanna say, like, all academics are like that. I had people who I could trust and who were good and who were honest and hardworking, but, they're just, any profession, I don't care what profession it is, there's, certain percentage are gonna be pathological liars, certain percentage are gonna be corrupt, uh and some of them weren't really too bright. I mean, there were people who, PhDs who could not write, uh, who I don't think could read, who I don't know. It's like I said, just disheartening to say the least.
Yeah, it is because as you pointed out, these people think they're so much better than everybody else. If they, I would, it's a lot more. It makes it a lot more annoying. It just seems more hypocritical. Why do you think that is? I mean, what's in the mindset of you? Obviously, don't have that mindset, but what is the mindset? Where do you think this comes from?
Most of them that were like that, there's a certain pattern. Mom and dad were college graduates. Maybe they were professionals. They went through school. If they worked, they barely worked or hardly had to work. Uh, and then they rolled through grad school. They went to a good school. They got out. They rolled right into a job, as soon as they finished grad school at like 29 or 30. And then, off they went for their careers. And they had never, i- they had never had contact with the rest of the world. I want to say the real world, but I mean, it is the real world.
Yeah, and you
Uh,
had contact with the real world,
oh
obviously.
yeah, I had more contact than uh, in some ways I wish I had had, but there's something to be said for that. I mean, I don't think they, I I posted the other day, I posted there was one point that I forget what was going on, but at a faculty meeting, somebody issued this resolution. They tried to get this resolution passed that we were make some statement showing our solidarity with the American workers, which like the American worker gives a shit what faculty at East Carolina think about, supporting them. Like they would even know where the hell is East Carolina? It's but they would do this stuff periodically. It was all posturing, and we were going to stand with the American worker. So I said, I have an even better idea. You want to show your solidarity? Instead of passing a resolution no one will ever see or hear. I said, why don't we do this? Why don't we get rid of the jackets and the dress shirts? Why don't we wear uniform shirts and you can have a little oval, on your chest with your name on it, like Chuck, Brad, Mike, and we'll look like American workers. I mean, if you wanna show your solidarity with the American workers, let's uniform ourselves like because when I worked at the parking lot, I had a shirt, had a little Mike thing, little oval Mike, and the other guy had Chucky and
Auto mechanics, yeah.
yeah, and I said, "Why don't we do that?" And they were like, "Oh," and it the thing never even came to a vote after that. They just kinda shut up. But I mean, that's the kind of thing that they would come up with to show their solidarity with the workers or, argument one time with a labor historian, and he was going on about unions. I just asked him a question. I said, "Have you ever worked in a factory? A union organized" because I worked in Nabisco for almost 2 years, American Bakery and Confectionery Workers Union. So, I mean, I knew how the union worked and everything. And he said, "No." I said, "Well, if you really wanna understand, what it's like to be a factory worker, maybe some summer instead of doing your research, get a job in a factory. It might bring you some understanding." I mean, I was a military historian. I worked for the Navy. I wanted to know how guys operated. So they sent me to the Persian Gulf in the middle of the tanker war with Iran. I was there for a month and I'm going out on patrols and, doing shit. And I was there when they shot down the Iranian Airbus, all that kind of stuff. I wanted to see what's it like for these guys out there. And they said, best way to do it, go.
Yeah.
I wasn't supposed to go out on patrols, but I'm interviewing the guys who go out on the small boats at night in the dark and they're, it's floating mines. You can't see anything. It's pitch black. And I said, what's it like? And they said, you want to know? We're going out tonight. Come with us. Okay. I had been told I couldn't do that, but I went out anyway. But I mean, if you want to understand what it's like, do it. You want to understand what it's like to play football, go play football. You want to understand what it's like to dig ditches, get a job digging a ditch. But these guys didn't have any of that. And for them, the world
Yeah.
was, they talk about being in a bubble. Well, it's not just the bubble they're in academia. They've been in a bubble their whole lives, many of them, not all. I mean, there were other people who came from, uh, I'm trying to think of it. Yeah, there was another example. I got in an argument with a faculty member. It went all the way up to the dean once, and it had to do with something academic. I can't even remember what it was. And we were going back and forth, and he was obviously losing the argument. So finally, the dean said to him, well, really, why should I do what you're saying? And the guy actually said, Palmer went to Temple. I went to Duke. That was his argument. That the dean should support him because he went to a better school than I went to. Now, he had gone to Duke. He was a full professor at the same place I was a full professor. So
Yes.
we had kind of evened out, even though I started, in a state school and he didn't. He had published like one book at that point. I had about 8. So in many ways, was way ahead of him. And the dean knew all this. I mean, that's why I was chair and he wasn't. But I mean, this guy actually thought this was an argument for his position because he went to a better school than I had gone to. And I think that's, sort of the problem with academics. If he thinks his argument's better than mine, even though I have a PhD and I have the same rank as him at the same school, but I went to a state school, what does he think about the value of his position compared to yours if you didn't even go to college?
Yeah.
I
Exactly.
if he can run me down, he can run anybody down, unless maybe the handful of people who went to, Yale or Harvard or something like that.
Yeah.
But, that's the kind of the mindset, uh, that they have for, how they view themselves, their relationship to the world, uh, and like I said, it's just the way it is.
Yeah, it's really a weird relationship, I'm reminded of what, Cordelia and Buffy the Vampire Slayer call it, you're a name tag person. You have a job that requires you to wear a name tag. It could be working as a salesperson or yeah, not being in the real world or going to work in the coal mines. They really do have a lot of contempt for everybody who's actually in the real world. It's rather odd. So you're and basically what you're noticing is that a lot of them are just trust fund babies who never have to do anything. It's
Yeah, to some extent. I mean, not all of them. Again, I had friends who had worked their way, maybe not as hadn't had to work as much as I had, but that had worked, and were much more appreciative of, what they had. But there were still a lot of, and remember, I'm at a East Carolina's a I mean, even within North Carolina, you've got Chapel Hill is at the top, then you have NC State. That's like tier 1, tier 2. Tier 3, you have
Duke.
No, well, I'm talking about the state
Yeah,
system. You have Charlotte, Wilmington, and East Carolina. So it's 3rd tier in the state system. If you look at the state, it's like 4th tier. If you look nationally, it's probably 4th or 5th tier. So it's not a particularly
yeah,
I mean, it wasn't a bad school. I mean, there were some things we did very good, other things not as well, but it's not like you're talking to Harvard or Duke. I mean, you can imagine, I can't even, well, I can't imagine, I was never there, what if the faculty at ECU are like that? What the hell are the faculty like at Harvard and Yale and Columbia and Princeton and Penn? Uh, how how much more overblown are their sensibilities about, who they are, where they come from, and people like them, and then I think that's part of the problem. Uh, there's something to be said for work and working working hard to get where you're at, and they don't really get it. I mean, I remember when I started there, I had a guy said to me, one of the full professors, he came in and he said, "I bet you never thought it was gonna be this hard." And I looked at him, I thought, "This is like the easiest job I had in my life." I mean, all the jobs when I worked at the parking lot, you went to the bathroom, you washed your hands, and then you went to the bathroom. In East Carolina, you went to the bathroom and then washed your hands. It was like that kind of a difference of a job. But I actually said to him, I said, I knew he taught sports history, so I used a sports illustration. I said, "Well, you're getting ready to go on deck, you get." Well, they did use different things. When I was a kid, we'd swing 3 bats, and it feels real heavy, and then you go up the bat and you only have 1. I said, "That's what this is like," and it was he just didn't get it. He couldn't comprehend that compared to the jobs I had done, working for the Navy where I'd literally been shot at, or, working in a parking lot where I had a knife in my throat one night, straight razor, that, teaching at East Carolina was like a gravy job compared to, the number of hours I had to work, and it's not that it wasn't hard at time. Until I was chair, it wasn't hard. Just being a regular faculty member was, walk in the park for me. Uh,
yeah,
but he didn't get it.
yeah. It's wild, and yeah, and you retired when?
2020,
Okay, 2020. So
August August 2020.
what did you see? Did you ever read any of some of the books that were criticizing academia? I mean,
Yeah,
Thomas Sowell had a book called Inside American Education, like Alan Bloom's Closing of the American Mind.
which I did read that one, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was, I mean, I started in 1969. My first semester, I saw the beginnings of you took English Comp, and I remember the English Comp class I had, there was an English Comp class before that in the same room, and I didn't have it was I had a gap between classes, so I would sit on in the floor on the wall waiting for my class to start, and I could hear what was going on in the class that was in there. When the English comp and people who teach English comp are usually people who are grad students are usually they do the English comp stuff. So these aren't PhDs, but they're going to be. And there was this woman in there, she's teaching a class that when you write I had come from a private Catholic high school. And we didn't do this. When you write like you speak. You know, I mean, you just talk the way you talk, and there's not like formal writing or anything. And so that wasn't what our teacher was telling us how to write. She didn't tell us to write that way. And I was doing really well, and I had met with her, after all the papers and all. So one day I wrote this thing, and I used this writing as you speak sort of format. She calls me in, gave me an F on the paper. She called me in, says, "Why did you do this suddenly?" And I explained to her, I said, "Well, the woman who teaches the class right before you in that room." "Oh, so and so," I don't remember what her name was. "That's what she's telling her students to do." So I thought maybe I'd try that. She said, "No, no, that dead wrong, write it over, I'll regrade it." So I wrote it over, it was fine. But I said to her, I said, "Well, this is the same department, and you're teaching us this, and she's teaching us like something pulls apart." I said, "What about all the students coming out of her class? What's gonna happen to them if they start writing like this in other classes?" I mean, they get to a history class and they start writing like, they're on the street somewhere. Uh, and she said it was sort of like, "That's beyond my pay grade" answer, and I mean, it really was. I mean, but the department wasn't doing that, so you could see it there. My second semester, this would have been spring '70, the second English class I had, we had to read Paul Ehrlich's The Population Bomb, um, which is still, a lot of people don't like that, but yeah, I didn't like it then either. Uh, I don't know if you remember Ehrlich and, the population of the United States, the highest we could feed in this country was like 180,000,000. After that, there'd be mass starvation. What were we up to? 330, 340. We're gonna run out world was gonna run out of oil in 1980.
Oh, yeah.
Uh, the government is gonna have to put birth control in our water to keep it from procreating, could keep the population down. And,
Yes.
I asked him the one day, I mean, he's got, this guy's teaching, he's got shorts, he's got a T-shirt, he's got sandals, he's got long hair, he's got wire rim glasses, and I said, like, "What's this have to do with English? Learning how to write?" I mean, I don't think Ehrlich was a good writer. He's a scientist and but it was you could see, okay, the point here is propaganda. It's the what today we call progressive worldview, then it was this liberal. And that was 1969 and '70, I'm seeing this. And then the 3rd semester, I took a course on journalism 101, whatever the number was. And I thought maybe I'd be a journalist, I'd be a reporter. I thought that might be cool. And I don't remember, I think it was CNN used to use the term factoid. And they used to say factoid, and a factoid was like really a piece of trivia, like a factoid, but that wasn't what I was taught. What I was taught in my journalism class in 19 that would have been, yeah, fall 1970. A factoid, you've got A, and you've got sources for A. You've got C, and you have sources for C. But there must be a B, but you don't have any sources. You have no documentation for B. So whatever you write about B is a factoid, and you write it. And I remember asking the professor, I said, "Well," actually, the professor was an adjunct who actually was a reporter at the Philadelphia Inquirer. I said, "Well, wait a minute. You're assuming that there's a B. Maybe C is really B. If there's this A and B, It's not A, a missing B, and a C. You're making assumptions here you don't really know about. No, 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 no. Yeah, but this is how it is. And there were other things. And that's when I decided I want to be a journalist. But I mean, if you think about that, and then you look at what happened with, I remember years ago, it was when I lived in Washington, there's a reporter for the Washington Post who wrote a story about a young girl who was a drug addict, and she had ended up dying of a drug overdose. And it turned out she didn't exist. She had made her up. And how could she do that? That's we were being trained to do that in that journalism class. Or, he's on MSNBC all the time now, Mike Barnicle. You ever see him on MSNBC? Or not that you watch it much, but you might see him on
I
clips.
haven't seen him.
He used to be with the, Boston Globe, I think, or one of the p newspapers. He was a big name journalist up in Boston, and he got fired. That's why he's on MSNBC. And most people don't know why he got fired. He got fired because he made up a story. And he had written he won awards for it. I don't know which prize he won, but it was a story about there was a black family and a white family. The white family, of course, was rich. The black family, of course, was poor. And they both had, like, I don't know, young sons, child sons. Both had cancer. They're both in cancer treatment in this hospital. And unfortunately, the poor black kid has something they can't really treat, and he dies. And or was it the other way around? Yeah, I guess it's the white family's son could be treated. He was gonna die. The black kid could be treated, but they didn't have the money. So the white family, knowing they couldn't do anything for the son anyway, used their resources to treat the black kid, and the black kid survives. And this is his wonderful story about black-white harmony, and this is what, he had published. Got picked up by Reader's Digest, and if I've dealt with Reader's Digest as a fact checker, they used to fact check everything.
Wow.
So they fact checked the story. So he went to the hospital and they said, "Who were these kids?" You know? They were, "We don't know what you're talking about." And they dug around. Apparently, he had made the whole thing up. There was no white family, there was no black family, there were all other holes in it. I mean, even if you have resources, if I have health insurance and this poor black kid's dying, I can't tell my health insurance to cover this kid. It doesn't work like that. I mean, there are all kinds of holes in the story that Reader's Digest. So he kept going back to Barnacle, and eventually he said, "Forget it," you know? And then there was an investigation, and he got fired, and now he's on MSNBC. But I see him all the time on MSNBC, pontificating, and it's just like, why did he do that? Well, journalism 101, factoid. A, C, B must exist. If you can't find the evidence for it, you just write around it. And I was being trained to do that. So, I mean, some of the things we see today, were in journalism, I was seeing in 1970. Now, I didn't see it in a political lens at that point. It just, I mean, actually, in those days, I was pretty far left. But I didn't like the idea that they would make shit up.
Yeah. And this was a time when Reader's Digest was the biggest magazine in America, so,
Oh, yeah, and mass
yeah,
they
easily
they
not
put the
realize it.
little books out with the compilations and stuff like that. Yeah, it was a big deal then, but I dealt with them twice, and they it was articles that had to do with the Middle East, and they would send them to me, and I'd have to, they'd have all these boxes, and you check it off and put a source, check it. It's a pain in the ass. Uh, but they were really good at that. I mean, obviously, you don't see fact checking today in the media. You see the Washington Post fact checking or, New York Times fact checking or any of
Ex
these other.
There's always this race to get the story out first, and it's just hard, and fact checking is hard. It's not. I mean, sometimes I bring people on, and later I find out it's not always and you can't always necessarily check all the facts, people.
No.
Yeah, I mean, one thing we often did do is that at least make sure you have all these things spelled right, like the name of the city, the person's name, that kind of thing. But it's, there's a lot of work involved.
I could tell you a story about, Nightline, Ted Koppel.
Yeah, oh
I
yeah,
was on night 19 this was 1992, and I don't know how, but they got hold of my name Uh, I had worked I'd worked for the Navy as a civilian, dealt with the Middle East. I mean, I wrote the official Navy history of the Navy in the Persian Gulf.
Yes.
I wrote it. Uh, and I had been there and I had published some things. So somebody gave him my name. So I get a call, "You wanna be on Nightline." You know, that was like my favorite show growing up. I mean, I started watching Nightline before it was Nightline. I always remember it was like America Held Hostage Day 27, dun, 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 Ayatollah Khomeini and the hostages in Iran. I mean, I'd watched Nightline from then, and I just loved the show. I at a VCR, I would record it every night. So this to me was like, I'm gonna be on Nightline. This is something. So I'm being the interview is being done not by Ted Koppel, but by one of his producers whom I won't name. And it's going on fine. Everything's fine. They're asking good questions. They're listening to me, and finally, the guy says to me, we were talking about the Iran Najjar, which was a Iranian ship that was laying mines in the Persian Gulf that we had captured, laying mines, shot it up with our special ops guys, captured it, sank the ship, sent the crew back to Iran via, I think it was Oman. I could be wrong. So the guy says to me, "What about the second ship we captured?" So I said, "But there wasn't a second ship." I mean, I was doing the history for this stuff. We didn't capture a second ship. He said, and the guy said, "We did." I said, "What's your source for that?" He said, "I can't give you his name, but he's a three-star in the Pentagon, active service, Navy admiral. And he told us there was a second ship." And I said, "He's wrong." They said, "Look, when did you leave the Navy?" I said, 1991. This is 1992. He said, "Well, he's there now." And he said there was a second ship. And the implication was we had captured a second ship and we killed everybody. We killed the crew, or the crew was missing. They hadn't been returned to Iran. So I said, "I'm not going there." And the producer said to me, "Look, he can't say this because he's active duty. He'll get in trouble. You can say it, you're out." I said, "But if it happened, I don't know about it. And as far as I know, that never happened. I don't buy it." "Well, he's an admiral. You were a civilian. What would you know?" I said, "I was there. I went over there. Was he over in the Persian Gulf, or is he sitting at a desk somewhere in, E-wing in the Pentagon or something, E-ring?" Uh, well, no, this is a story. I said, "Well, I'm not gonna say that because I don't know that it's true. As far as I know, it's false." And the guy said to me, "You wanna be on Nightline, don't you?" And I said, "Motherfucker, yeah, I do wanna be on Nightline. I'm dying to be on Nightline, but I'm not gonna sit here and lie about something." And by this point, I had told him to turn everything off, so everything's off. And I said, "I'm not gonna say it." So he says, "Sit here." So he goes in, I guess he's talking to Koppel. He comes back, he says, "Okay," and he dropped that, and then just finished the interview. And they did air my interview, and they didn't botch it up or anything, so I can't complain about that. But they caught hell for that interview because they found somebody else, some naval expert, to come in and say there had been a second ship and the crew was missing mysteriously. And, if he had just told me what they were getting at, I would have known right away what it was because I knew what had happened. When we caught the Iran jar we had captured had it's what the Iranians called it at the time, but I think it was, I forget the old name of the ship under the Shah's Navy. There was a different name on the back of the ship. They put names on the sterns of the ship. So in some of the correspondence, it was referred to as the Iran jar. In other parts of the correspondence, like the guys who handled the actual ship before we sank it, they went and they looked and they took the name off the back of the ship, which was the old name. So you could find documents with two different names, but it was the same ship. And this admiral, who must have been some desk jockey back in the Pentagon, saw the documents with different names and assumed there were 2 ships. Instead of checking it out, it's really 1 ship referred to 2 different ways in the documentation. So, of course, they immediately the Navy shut that down, and it was, they were attacked. But all that struck me was the asshole, I forget his name now, who went on tape on Nightline and said that we had captured a 2nd ship and the crew had disappeared, which didn't happen. I mean, he had but they probably said to him, "You wanna be on Nightline?" So he would say that. And then I started realizing, well, what else goes on? How many other people have said this, that, every other thing on Nightline or any of these other news shows because they face the same challenge I got? "You wanna be on Nightline, don't you?
Yeah.
So here's what we want you to say." So you say it. I refused to say it, and they still had me on anyway. But I thought and this is 1992. This isn't 2025. So, I mean, I knew then that, "Oh, man, this is" and this is Nightline, a show that I thought had a really good reputation, and if they're doing it, what about the shows who have the 2020s and the other shows that have, uh, and some of them got caught on occasion with exploding cars and things like that. How much of this goes on? How many other stories where people come out and say the government has done X, and they said it because they wanted the story, and you can find somebody who you'll say that that's what happened. So it was, yeah, that's why I really started losing my faith. I guess by that point, by 1992, my faith in the media was
Yeah.
totally shot.
It's interesting how you lose that faith in things. Uh, yeah, were you in the Gulf when when were you in the Gulf exactly?
June and July 1988.
So you were in the Gulf, because in 1988, I was 17 years old, but I remember when the Iranian plane was shot down. What can you
Mhm.
tell me about that?
I was there. I mean, I not physically shot it down.
How far away?
Uh, I that day it was shot down. I was in Manama, Bahrain. We were getting ready to go
You're
back.
in Bahrain, so you would have been what? Maybe not that far away at all, really, but I mean,
Oh, no, I mean, it's not that big.
500 miles or
Well, the
100 miles, 1,000 miles?
oh, no, it's well, Bahrain's, like, here, and
Yeah.
the plane was shot down toward the Strait of Hormuz, which is where I mean, what a lot of people don't understand.
So this would have been maybe 100 miles, 200
Oh,
miles?
no, a couple 100 miles away,
Okay.
but we were in our hotel, and, I mean, a guy came up to my room, one of the other guys I was with, banging on the door excitedly. He said, "We shot down one of their F-14s." They had a couple. They still well, they did until the Israelis just took them out. And I said, "Wow, they're great." And then next thing I know, I get a call, "We're not to go out. They don't want us on the street." I said, "What
Oh,
happened?" And it wasn't an F-14, it was an airliner. Um,
yeah.
and we did shoot it down. I mean, there's no doubt about that. Uh, but we went out anyway. We were getting ready to leave, and we wanted to go to the souk. We wanted to buy some gold and stuff. I bought my wife a gold bracelet. We're gonna, take it home. So we figured, there's 3 of us. We were pretty big, and we'll go out. So we're walking around, and, we're all watching carefully, and nobody gave a shit. And I remember we were coming back. We stopped at a place to get something to eat. And they said, "The people in Bahrain don't seem to give it." It was on the you see it on the news, I couldn't I don't understand Arabic, but they were watching it. And, like, they weren't, like, watching the thing about the shoot down and looking at us like, evil Americans." They actually sometimes they were applauding that this plane had got shot down because they really hated the Iranians.
Yeah.
And I thought then that was, but when we flew out, I guess it was a day or 2 after that, and there were F-14s. We were on a, Alaska Air charter with a lot of the military personnel who were basically most of the people in the Persian Gulf were on TDY, temporary 6-month things, so they were constantly moving people in and out. So we were on this commercial airline charter taking us out, and we had, like, you look out and you see an F-14 out here, and there was one on the other side. They were taking to make sure the Iranians didn't try to get funny and shoot us down. Why did it happen? I remember being over there and, people deal with maps, you think of Persian Gulf, somebody will take out a map. Navy doesn't deal with maps, they deal with charts. And if you look at a chart of the Persian Gulf, all the deep waters on the Iranian side of the Gulf. It's like
Yeah.
a narrow it's almost like the Persian Gulf for shipping purposes, if you take out Iranian waters, is a river. And it's also, if you look at the commercial air corridors, it's covered with commercial air corridors. Everywhere in the Persian Gulf, you're in a commercial air corridor.
What's an air carter?
Well, the planes are supposed to stay in certain air corridors. So if
Air corridors, okay, yeah.
yeah, if you pick them,
Certain paths, yeah.
yeah, there's supposed to be a certain path. And the airliner was in the proper path.
It was in the
Uh,
proper, yes.
yeah, it was there's questions about whether it was, should have been going up. It was looked like it was going down and things like that. But one of the things that
And
uh,
and
I
and at the narrowest
I
I wanna point out, at the narrowest point, the strait is only gets down to only about 40 miles wide.
yeah, down toward the where the Strait of Hormuz is, it's really narrow. And we were operating down there, and it is an air corridor. I mean, so there, some of this has to do with the Reagan administration. And I mean, I voted for Reagan. I like Reagan, but Reagan was running this show as a peacetime operation. And that may not seem like a big deal, but it sounds good, peacetime. But there are implications to that for everything the Navy does. Because I went out on a small boat twice on these night patrols, special ops. I mean, we had more mounts than we had people because the crew size was held at 8. Full crew would be 10, but since it was peacetime, you couldn't have more. I remember I was 10 and 12. I think that was, but we were like too short because a full crew would be wartime footing. We were on peacetime footing, so you couldn't have a full crew. So like the night we went out, I'm a civilian. I'm manning the grenade launcher. So we're only short one person. So they've got this civilian who goes, yeah, no, on a grenade launcher. Um, in addition to, taking down the hit records and stuff. But that kind of stuff. And so the Navy has these E-2C Hawkeyes, which are like little mini AWACS, and they're only allowed to peacetime are only allowed so many hours in the air. So they couldn't keep them up over the Gulf all the time. And this is going to really complicated. There were 2 AWACS that operated out of Saudi Arabia with joint U.S.-Saudi crews. They had shifted up to the north to watch Baghdad because the Iraqis had sank the Stark, so we needed to keep an eye on what was coming out of there. So when they shifted up, it left the Gulf uncovered, and the Navy was gonna cover them with the Hawkeyes, but peacetime, they couldn't do it 24 hours. So what they decided to do was to put the Vincennes, which was a, Ticonderoga-class cruiser, which has,
Yeah.
A fixed array radar, which can do air searching, but it's not designed to do that. The original Ticonderoga's motto was, "If it flies, it dies." I mean, these are ships that are designed to be carrier protectors, the outer ring or the aircraft, the inner ring, you've got the middle ring, you've got the Ticonderoga-class cruisers with their air-to-air missiles, and if anything gets into that ring, they shoot it down. That's what they're designed to do. They're not designed to deal with commercial air and military air. They're only designed to deal with anything in their zone is a threat. So they decide they're gonna put the Vincennes in there. And w one of the other reasons was that the second AWACS on the southern part of the route used to overfly Oman, which would cover the strait. But in a hearing, a congressional hearing, I forget the congressman, he later became Bill Clinton's Secretary of Defense. He came out and somebody was complaining about the Gulf states don't do anything to help us, and he said, "Oh, they do. Omanis are letting us overfly their airspace." Of course, the Omanis didn't like that, so they wouldn't let us overfly. So the AWACS had to adjust its orbit to avoid that, and that's what left the Gulf uncovered. So the Vincennes gets rushed to the Straits. I knew the guy in San Diego who ran the computer training, and he had a training program for Comair, how to deal with commercial air in that environment. Because he's, the weapons, these ships carry is, like, lethal. You lock things up, you shoot, they're gone. And nobody from Vincennes ever showed up. And from a point of view of Vincennes, the officers have all this shit to do, and the last thing they wanted to do was to spend, 12 hours, 14 hours in training for calm air situations. So they never went through the training, and they got rushed over there. They find themselves there, and out comes a commercial airliner. They lock it up, and they shoot it down. And it's people say, "US shot it down." We did. I mean, I'm not
Yeah.
saying that, but, I was on the Nicholas at one point, and I was on the bridge, and you have to understand the officers, he said, "Well, yeah, officers." I mean, a lot of these guys were lieutenants. They were like 22, 23. I mean, I was like an old man. I was like, I don't know, I was like 30, 37. I mean, they thought I was an old guy. I mean, to me, these are kids. And I was on the Nicholas the one day, and the Iraqis had launched a strike, like a dozen Mirages, and they're coming right at us because basically we would move our stuff around. The Iraqis couldn't navigate, especially when they flew low, which is stressful for anybody, especially for poorly trained pilots, which they were. So we would move our assets to positions so they would fly and use them. Like, if they were gonna hit a target in Iran over here, we would put our ship directly across from that, so they could fly to our ship, do a 180, or, do a turn, 90-degree turn, and if they stayed on that course, they'd run right into the target. So we would position our ships to sort of help them. But that meant they were flying over our ships all the time, and they had they hit the Stark with 2 missiles and killed people. So it was kind of nerve-wracking. So they said, "The Iraqis are coming." So I went out on the bridge wing, and I'm looking, and 12 Mirages go over us, but we got them locked up, and you got these 22, 23-year-olds in there trying to make decisions, and they're what do they call it? They call it deconfliction. We're talking to the Iraqis, you know, "Iraqi, just tell us you understand who we are. We're a US ship." And nothing. We're not getting anything from them, and they're getting, "Iraqis, we've got you locked up." You know, they could take 1 or 2 of them down, but, that's just all they could handle. But fortunately, at the last second, the Iraqi came over, Iraqi pilot, blah, 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 blah." And, you could hear a guy who's just probably nervous as hell flying at, 150 feet over the water, navigating that way. And they did a bat turn over us, and they went. But, the guy's got his finger on the launcher, some 23-year-old lieutenant, and all he has to do, he puts that down, and we've got an international incident. And it's stress. I mean, everybody's running around. Why aren't they answering? We don't wanna get starked.
Mhm.
Uh, and it's the same with them in a sense. They got something coming at them, and again, this isn't an excuse. I'm just trying to explain all these things. I mean, there's no one thing that led to that shoot down. It's all these little things, improper training for them in sends, a congressional leak that had moved the AWACS up. Uh, and of course, the Iranians were notoriously, look, again, one time we were in the Strait of Hormuz. I guess I was on the Nicholas then too. And all of a sudden yeah, we're down where the narrow part of the strait is. And all of a sudden, an Iranian P3 Orion, which was a patrol. The Navy used them in those days for prop planes, any submarine patrols, patrol reconnaissance, that kind of stuff. They could technically carry a harpoon, but we didn't think the Iranians had any. It's coming right at us, like directly toward us. So we lock them up, and I'm in there watching these kids. They're 20, again, they're early 20s. mid-20s, some of them. And, yeah, just south of, on that map, Bandar Abbas, we're somewhere on
Yeah.
the southern half, because to stay out of Iranian waters.
Yeah, this
So
was
the and
of going from Bandar Abbas to Dubai, and for people who are just listening, the Strait of Hormuz is like an upside down V, and this was at the peak of the V.
yeah, and the P3 is coming at us from the west, so he's heading, like, directly toward us on an easterly course, and we're heading up into the strait, so we're heading west on that course.
And this is also a
And,
very short flight. I think it's only like a half hour or something.
yeah, well, I don't know where he'd come from, but he's
Oh, I'm
coming.
talking about the flight from Bandar
Oh,
Abbas to
oh,
to
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
it's one of those flights where you probably don't have a minute where you can unbuckle your seatbelt. You're literally going up and then going back down again.
yeah.
I wonder, considering that, how high would the plane have ever gotten at all? I mean, is it possible to, just be able to tell if it's a military plane or a commercial airline just by sight or not?
If you can see it, but I mean, they were beyond. I mean,
Yeah,
they're looking at their instruments on the Vincennes, which are just, it's an icon, and even the icon, you have to give it information. You have to know what the flight. And the other thing was, if I remember, I could be wrong, the flight had been delayed, and
yeah,
we had the air schedules for the Iranian air, so we knew, that what just like a U.S. air schedule. But
yeah,
it's. I'm not saying there was anything suspicious about it, but
yeah.
the plane that they got a plane in a commercial air corridor that shouldn't have been there. It should
Flights
have been there should have been a plane earlier, or there would have been a plane later, but there should have been a plane then. And of course, one of the options is, well, maybe it's just. But the thing I was getting at with the P3 thing is they often didn't communicate with us. So if a P3 is heading right toward us and we lock them up, and they go on the horn, the radio, Iranian P3, this is U.S. warship. You don't identify anything beyond that. You don't want to give them any intel which ship it is. We have you locked up. Please, turn north. Go, bear away. And this, like, 2 or 3 times we warned this guy to bear away. So finally he comes on the horn. He speaks English. Many of the Navy patrol pilots have been trained in the U.S. at that point. It's not that far removed from the Iranian Revolution. So he comes on. This is, Iranian P3. I see you. I will be turning north, proceeding north, away from us, back toward Iran. So we're saying, good, thank God. We don't want to shoot down an Orion. All of a sudden, you can hear the IRGC guys come on, Republican Guard Corps come on. P3 pilot, uh, this is IRGC, and they're speaking English too. We can hear all this.
Yeah.
You know, continue on course. Do not deviate. Martyr pilot, do not deviate. They want him to fly toward us, so we shoot him down. Now, this has happened before the Vincennes shoot down, and I was there when this happened. So he comes back on and he says, no, I'm diverting. And they come back on again and they start telling him they know who he is and they know where his family, his family. So they're threatening the guy's family that if he doesn't martyr himself when he lands, he's going to be in trouble. His family will be in trouble. That's what they're threatening with. Now, I don't know that they ever did this. I mean, I no follow through.
So, yeah.
He eventually does turn away. But I mean, they were trying to get him, and we knew that they wanted him to fly at us and get martyred that day. So, all this goes into I knew this. I'm sure the guys on the Vincennes knew this. So everybody is, you know, you can't trust what your eyes and your sensors tell you because there might be something else going on. This may be I mean, if they would fly a P3 into us, would they fly an airliner? I don't think that was their intention. I mean, I don't believe that was their intention. But, once you get to the point where anything is conceivable, then you end up with you make mistakes, and we made a mistake and shot the airliner down.
Yeah, it certainly was. I mean, I don't know. So it sounds odd because, is there a way to know? So English seems to have become the universal language of pilots in situations like this. I don't know.
I think so. I mean, I'm not an expert on that, but it seems like, you listen to tapes from India and they're speaking English. I mean, I think it's,
Well, there have been accidents, with sometimes various accents because you different controllers didn't speak English and stuff like that. So you have to. But it was unfortunate, with you had all these people dying. It's of course the plane was just. And I don't know if, if we have better instrumentation now, if you would have been able to tell, "Oh, that's a commercial plane," maybe you could tell those things.
there's things they can put on that it's called squawking. If you can turn things on and off. I don't, I've actually, I had read the classified report, but that was, over 30 years ago. I don't remember now, uh but even there you get to the problems. I mean, we were told, I remember being in briefings where they're telling people, "Expect the unexpected." The unexpected could be you put a civilian squawker on a military plane, or you squawk commercial and you're gonna, I mean, we knew they were willing to martyr their own pilots. Whether they were willing to martyr a crew was another story. And again, I don't mean to imply that that's what they were doing, that they wanted us to shoot down that plane. But the way the thinking at the time for people who were over there, who were and another thing factor with the Vincennes, with all of them, it was peacetime, and that means, like, I mentioned that there weren't enough people on our patrol boat to cover all the mounts, the guns. The ships were all undercrewed too, and you have to you're a naval officer, you've got your duty. You're a division officer, which requires other duty. And then all the surface ships in the Gulf, like the Vincennes and the Nicholas, all had to look out for Iranian small boats, and the crews aren't set up to do that. So that's another duty you have, and there's only 24 hours in a day, and you're supposed to sleep 8, so that leaves you 16 hours. I mean, I was in the guy who was the intel officer on the Nicholas, and it was his, like, he had his regular duty, his division duty, his they had a patrol for surface attacks, and then it was his intel officer duty. This is like his 4th job, and this is a guy who's, like, 23, he's got bags with his eyes like this, he's dead tired. They were all dead tired. If you'd be talking to them, and if you talk too long, they'd fall asleep. I mean, these guys were just, like, half asleep half the time. But they're up on, things with buttons that can kill people. Uh, and everybody was they were all exhausted. Even the young guys were exhausted. And I'm sitting there one time, and Intel's coming in off this dot matrix printer, and it's folding into this box. And I said, you know, "Do you need me to get this for you to look at?" He said, "Oh, no." I said, "I don't even bother." I said, "What do you mean you're this is like the Intel feed coming into the ship." He said, "If it's big, they'll call us up, let us know." He said, "I don't have time to go through all that." And this stuff was the whole time we're talking, I'm interviewing, the stuff's spitting out, it's just
Yeah.
folding into the box. He says, "You wanna go through it? Go ahead." So I'm going through it. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that I shouldn't have seen. But, I mean, that you get to the Vincennes, all these guys are tired. They're probably sleeping like 4 hours a night. They're told to expect the unexpected. They're doing a job that the ship's not really designed to do. And you add all this stuff up and you end up with a disaster. I mean, that's how it
It's
happens.
quite unfortunate that I do, I remember I was 17 though, and I just remember thinking, "Are we really the good guys here?" I don't but it's hard to say too, and of course I naturally ask, "Why were we there?" I don't think you have that much time left, but one thing else I gotta ask you about. You mentioned that your father was involved with the Philadelphia Police Department.
Yeah.
What is your opinion about the move incident?
I wasn't there then, I'd moved
Yeah.
away. I knew some of the move guys. They used to park at our parking lot because their
Yeah,
lawyer
this was
was.
in 1985 where the city
Yeah.
bombed a house, and because these were row houses, ended up taking about 50 other homes with it.
I know it was 50, but the whole row went out.
Yeah,
Yeah, it
yeah,
was is Wilson Goode was the mayor. He's our first black mayor of Philadelphia.
yeah, the black
Uh,
man did this, yeah. Yeah.
and I mean, I knew in the '70s, I knew who Move was because their lawyer was in a Packard building across the street from where I worked, and they would come into our lot, and they were notorious because, uh, their cars smelled like nothing I've ever smelled in my life because they didn't
That's like
wash.
oh, I
And the
things like this, that these people really were maybe not very good neighbors.
no. I mean, they would come in. There was one guy, they all had Africa in their name. His name was Gerald Ford Africa, I think was his name. And he would come in. I think it was a Ford Falcon he drove, and it smelled so bad. And when it came in, the black guys most of the guys I worked with, I said were black. They wouldn't touch the car because if you got into the car, because it'd be in the summer and, you're sweaty. If you get in that car and you're damp already, you're gonna pick up the scent from that car and you'll carry it around the rest of the day.
Yikes.
So, they would see Gerald Ford Africa come in and his, there'd be like 7, 8 people packed in that car to go across to the lawyer. And I said, "Ain't no way I'm getting in that." I won't use the words they used to describe these people. They were, words I can't use, you can't use. They used often, one of their most frequently used words. So, nobody would get in a car. So, what we used to do is we'd reach in and put it in neutral and roll it just somewhere out of the way. And then when they would come back, we'd roll it back out, roll it where they could get out of the lot, and they never tipped. But nobody would even get in their cars to drive. So, I mean, yeah, they were like, ugh, and, you know, the black guys wouldn't touch them. And they lived in this row house, and there were, rats and everything else, and, I guess they were trying to evict them or something. I can't remember at the time, but,
Yeah.
yeah, they decided to drop a pyrotechnic device on a row house, which probably wasn't a good idea, and it burnt most I think the row
Yeah.
went with it.
Yeah, because these were, I mean, row houses, you've got houses where there's nothing in between, so you've
Mhm.
got a common wall with the house next, I mean, and so there's a very serious risk of the fire spreading, which is what happened.
Yes, it did,
Yeah,
and they were something. I mean, it's interesting to watch how African Americans dealt with them, which was not charitable. This is
well, there's
they
maybe
didn't
it's like,
like them.
you give us a bad name if you're, I mean, especially if you're that living like that, it's, I've always wondered, it just seems like they were serving a warning. Yeah, that was 13 May 1985. It was a but, but you said your dad was a police officer with Philadelphia for how long? It's
He started in, let's see, as soon as he turned 17, it was
right.
43.
Yeah.
He quit high school, went in World War II, Atlantic, Mediterranean, Pacific. He got out, he worked for Bud, which was I think they made frames for cars,
Okay.
and then his uncle, Arnold, my great uncle, got him a job he was a policeman, so he got him a job on the police force, and he was in traffic for years. That's how he knew the people at the parking lot where I got my job when I was 16, even though I was illegal. Uh, I should have been 18, I wasn't. And then he went into the labor squad, which was labor
Yeah.
relations, and he did that until in the early s so I guess he was a cop from about 47, and he went out on disability. Well, it was when Wilson Goode was elected. The black mayor came in, he brought in his people, and, my father wasn't bitter about it. He said, "I got the job because of political connections." Goode came in, different set of political connections, so my dad went out with everybody he worked with. So they put him back on the beat, but by this time, he's an old guy with arthritic knees, so he just got them to write him out as a, um, you know, invalid or whatever, and he went out on a disability. And then when he hit it for proper age, he went out on full retirement. But he was, I mean, I hate to say it, but it's, you know, that was, I realized, I hate to say it's my dad, but, it's a very corrupt city, and I'm sure it's just as bad as it is now as it was then.
Yeah.
Because we always had tickets for, I mean, he would take me to Eagles games at Franklin Field when I was a kid, or I'd see Wilt Chamberlain, or when the Warriors, he was with the Warriors in Philadelphia, or
Yes.
baseball tickets or other things, and then later on, senatorial scholarship, and it was, he knew, when I worked at a parking lot, we were paying cops off to not push traffic away. There were, um I started there, I was 16, and
Yeah.
this guy came in, this big blinking, he's got a bodyguard with him, and he doesn't pay, he doesn't get a ticket, they pull him over to the side, all the black dudes I work with are all going up and they're giving him money, or he's giving them money. So I asked the one guy I knew, it's Archie Edwards. So, what is he?" He said, "That's," I won't use his name, "Ben. He's a shark." I said, "Well, I didn't even know what a shark, what do you mean shark? Loan shark. I didn't know what a loan shark was. I had to go home and ask my father. I'm a 16-year-old in, like, a Catholic high school. I know what a loan shark is. He explained to me, I said, "Well, what's he do?" "Well, he, he'll loan you 100, you give him 120 the next week." I said, "Yeah, 20% interest for 1 week? Oh, you don't have a bank account, blah, 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 blah." And he would come in every Friday. He knew the guys got paid in cash in those days. He knew exactly when they got paid, like 3:00, 3:30. Ben would come in with his bodyguard, and he'd collect the money. And sometimes if the guys weren't there, they'd give me the money to pay up Ben, 'cause I guess they figured my father would kill me if I took the money, 'cause he was always watching what I was doing. So, I would give Ben the money, and I didn't know who Ben was. So one day, I was home, and I'm watching the news, and the city was unveiling this new construction project, and they had Mayor James Tate and the deputy mayor and these other guys, and up on the podium with him is the head of the Ironworkers Union, and it's this guy, Ben. I said, "Oh, Ben's the treasurer of the Ironworkers Union?" So my dad gets home. My dad is in the labor squad, police, labor relations, unions. So my dad gets home. I said, Dad, you know that guy in the parking lot, Ben?" "Yeah." "He's the treasurer of the Ironworkers Union." He said, "Yeah, I know him." I said, "He's a loan shark." He said, "Yeah, I know." He said, "Ironworkers have from, like, Broad Street to the river, and from, Race Street to South Street. Carpenters Union has," and he starts telling me the districts of the city, how they're carved up for sharking, loan sharking, by the unions. I said, "Dad, you're on the labor squad. I mean, you know this? The city knows this?" He said, "Yeah, well, they do the loan sharking, they kick back a certain percentage to the city, the mayor, the other politicians in the city." And I think, like, you know, I'm a 17-year-old kid, and the whole fucking city's corrupt. I mean, they're doing all this loan. A couple years ago, about
Oh,
6 or
wow.
7 years ago, I think the Ironworkers Union was busted by the FBI in Philadelphia for, among other things, loan sharking. But this was 1968, I saw this, and my father knew it, the city knew it, the police department knew it, and, it was, I mean, the cops are getting paid, and, who knows, who else was getting paid, and, we're down in Atlantic City, and we're working with the mob, and it's just like, and that's life in the big city, I guess. So it's,
Yeah, it's very interesting. Philadelphia certainly has its. Yeah, it's not William Penn's town anymore, is it? No.
no, well, I was born in December 1951, and the following month, a Democrat took over as mayor, and they've had a Democratic mayor basically the last 73 years. The Democrats have run Philadelphia. For I mean, I had a friend who worked there, and in the summer, they would get off at noon. They would break for lunch Thursdays, and they didn't come back. They had to be back by the afternoon on Tuesday. So basically, his summer hours where he worked from like 12 noon on Tuesday to 12 noon on Thursday. And then on Thursday afternoon, they'd all drive down to their beach places, stay there the weekend, and drive back Tuesday morning. And that was the summer schedule for, like, a lot of the city workers, or at least work the office he worked
Oh,
in
wow, yeah.
municipal building. And I said, "Wow, that's really cost effective," you know? You have to work you're working a 16-hour week in the summer and getting paid for 40 hours. Uh, but, yeah, it was, I hate to say, 'cause, my father was small level for, what was going on with, the corruption, but, I mean, I witnessed it all the time. I knew pretty much a lot of what was going on. I'm sure I didn't know everything, but God forbid what else was going on that I didn't know about. But, uh, and again, that was 50, 55 years ago, and I don't think it's gotten any better.
It's quite possibly gotten worse, although Philadelphia's probably has less people now, though. It's
Oh,
kind
it does. Populations, not only has the population declined, most of the decline were the taxpayers. So, their tax base is a lot, but they've made some decent attempts to rebuild it with, incentives and trying to, um, gentrify certain areas, and they've had some I think Rendell, when he was mayor, did a pretty good job. Since then, I mean, they have some successes, some failures. I mean, the city is a safety, it goes up and down, but I remember there was one point where, I ran the stats. I mean, if you were a, like, 22-year-old black guy, you had a higher chance of being murdered in Philadelphia than you had of dying in Iraq. It was during the Iraq War. Uh, as bad as the Iraq War was, and it was bad, you were actually you were
yeah.
safer in Baghdad than you were in Philadelphia as a civilian.
I've heard, for example, that the neighborhood around Temple is really bad. It's,
Oh, it was bad. When I was there, we used to I usually drove, but sometimes we would take the subway up or down from Center City to do stuff, and it was easier to do that than take a car. When you would get off the subway at 13th Street was the Temple exit, you had to pay a tax to the Black Panthers. You'd get off the subway, and the Black Panthers would line up on a wall with their, berets, sunglasses, leather coats, bandoliers sometimes. Never saw open weapons. And they would send little boys, 5, 6 years old. They'd have the Black Panther paper, and they'd come up to you, "Panther paper?" Panther paper's a quarter. And you could get the Enquirer for a quarter. This is like a little crappy Panther paper. You paid the quarter. That was the tax to get off the subway there. You got your Panther paper, went up, you threw it in the trash, you went to class. If you didn't pay it, like, at one time, my friend said, "I ain't paying." They smashed his glasses, took his coat, beat him up. So it was, you know and, we complained to the city, you can complain to the safety police on Temple, and they weren't gonna do shit. Panthers ran the subway exit. You got off, you paid your quarter. So if it was you go downtown, you're gonna pay your toll, you're gonna go back, you pay a quarter. It's just, always make sure you had a quarter, because if you gave a kid a dollar, they won't give you change. So, you know, got a quarter, we're gonna go downtown. You got quarters? Yeah. We'd all head downtown and do whatever, go see a movie or whatever, and then come back up, pay the tax, go to class. That was, yeah, it was pretty, when we the freshman lot, we were freshmen, was you had to come out and you had to actually walk through the community, which was like a disaster. And we used to we used to take turns. We used to call it taking point. One guy would walk out, and the rest of us would walk like 10 feet behind him in a group because the one time we were walking up, and somebody in an abandoned house threw a brick at us, or they throw rocks or bottles. So we'd take turns walking first, so that if something came out of the abandoned houses, you'd get hit, not the rest of the guys. It was a firebomb or whatever was gonna happen. Uh, that was, just part of the temple experience. Uh, and it was I mean, I never got I was robbed once, but that was sort of my own fault. I was stupid. But, you know, I never got hurt, so I can't complain too much, but you had to be alert and you had to be careful, certain times, don't park there, park here, poorly lit, well lit, And of course, as soon as you weren't freshmen anymore, you paid extra money to go park at a better lot, and then you just didn't want to deal with that anymore. Uh,
Yeah, well, it's been good having you on today. Have anything else to say before we go?
no, I enjoyed it, and,
Yeah, and you're on Twitter. That's the best place to find you.
about the only place I quit. Well, I got kicked off, Facebook years ago for
Oh, jeez.
bullshit, actually, it was right after the election, the 2020 election, within a 36-hour period, my Facebook account got taken down. I used to have a YouTube channel, which I guess technically it's still there, but a bunch of my YouTubes got taken down, and, uh, on Twitter, I lost 35% of my followers. Mysteriously, within a 36-hour period, all 3 of these platforms hit me at the same time. Uh, so I ended up I'm still on, well, it's X now. Actually, right at the time that Elon Musk took over X, for the 3rd time, every time I get to about 10,000 followers, they knock me down to 6,500. It's like clockwork. I got up to like 9,998. Bam, I come back the next day, I'm down to, 6,300.
Yeah,
And I
it's
said, "Bullshit." So I sent an email to a text you know, at Elon Musk, whatever, and I said, "What the hell's going on?" I never got a response. Next morning, I wake up and I'm over 10,000. So somebody had still in the woods in Twitter had maybe it was in the algorithm. As soon as I hit 10, I was gonna get kicked down to 6,500, and they said it was when I complained, they said they were bots, but they weren't. I mean, there were people I knew that had followed me, and they were gone, and they were still there, but they had been unfollowed. I mean, so it wasn't just bots, it was bullshit. And, and it went off in Twitter, and I'm up to, like, I don't really push it anymore, but it's sort of drifted up to about 13,000 now. And, yeah, I never got back on, I go to YouTube, but I haven't posted. I gave up posting videos 'cause I would post them, they would take them down, or they'd flag them, or I wasn't monetized or anything, they were just,
yeah.
uh
Mhm.
yeah, the one I mentioned the election. I didn't say that the election of 2020 had been rigged. I said that there were people who believed it was rigged, which to me is a perfectly valid, true statement. There are people who believed it was rigged. I didn't say it was rigged, but that was enough. Video got taken down, and, Facebook, it was somebody had posted this image of what was allegedly an Israeli soldier, all in black, helmet, with this, like, 12-year-old Palestinian girl crying, and he's threatening her. And the Hindustan Times had seen the picture, and it was actually an Indian soldier with a rioting Muslim girl. They had nothing to do with Israel or Palestine, or IDF anyway. And this was in the Hindustan Times, and it had been fact checked by Facebook, and they posted. the Hindustan Times story to fact check this other posting, which had was misleading people about something that an Israeli soldier had done, which had actually been in India like 8 years before. So I took the Hindustan Times story and reposted it as, "Look what" this is how the Palestinians lie. And one of the Facebook had its different teams. So a different team on Facebook flagged my post, took it down, and, uh, suspended my account. And my source was their own story on Facebook.
Yeah.
That the Facebook fact checkers had posted it,
Oh, yeah.
and they basically suspended my account for using their own fact check. And I said, "This made no sense." So then they suspended they went after a couple other accounts. Some of them were like 9 and 10 years old, some of my posts. And I said, "What did I say?" And they said, "Well, go here to see." So I tried to log in to see, and it said, "You can't. You had to go here." So I went there, and then eventually they got back to me and they said, "Well, if you admit that you posted misleading stuff, you can get into your account." I said, "Well," so basically you're telling me I have to admit guilt before I can see what I'm accused of doing. And that was basically it. That the only way I could see what I had done was to admit that I had done it, which to me was like something out of Stalin's,
Yeah,
system where, "What's my crime? You tell us." So I just that was the Facebook, Instagram, anything having to do with Meta, I just, gone.
yeah, it's awful. Well, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, go buy my novel Escaping the Village, go to Buy Me a Coffee, people are giving me money there, check out my Substack. Thank you, Michael Anthony Palmer. I am Chris Baker, we're out. Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you.